It's Saturday, November 22nd, and the Baltimore City delegation to the state capital, Annapolis, has hosted a hearing about increasing accountability of law enforcement. As the Real News has reported, Maryland state law is a key obstacle to greater civilian oversight of police. The current Civilian Review Board has been unable to stem a rising tide of excessive force allegations against the police, such as the recent video of an officer brutally punching Colin Truss in the face, or the 100 cases of brutality the city has settled to a tune of $5.7 million over the past 3 years, as a recent Sun investigation revealed. Delegate Jill P. Carter chaired the meeting and is spearheading efforts to reform state law.
The purpose of this is to bring the legislative arm here to Baltimore and hear from people here, because very often when we sponsor this legislation or we try to advocate for it in Annapolis, there is no connection between Annapolis and the pain the people are feeling here. And it's very difficult to get large numbers of people to come and tell their stories to us. And so to ensure that some of my colleagues don't think that it's a myth that these things occur and that these are the real problems.
Also testifying was the family of Tyrone West, a man who was beaten and killed by Baltimore police officers.
My question is for the police. When was the beating supposed to stop? My son was on the ground screaming for the beating to stop. Was the beating supposed to continue till he was no longer breathing, no longer moving? My son was dead, and your police officer still was kicking him in the back of his head, and he was cuffed. It was a supervisor that was supposed to come and I guess to see what was going on and hopefully put a stop to this brutal beating. He did not. He participated.
Also testifying were attorneys and former law enforcement about why they support greater civilian oversight and accountability of police.
In particular, I want to bring up the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. We don't really need to take on the entire LEOBR. There are a couple of really key provisions, I think, that folks should be attentive to, and I have to do with this notion that only police can police themselves, which is, in fact, the opposite of what we have found across the country, right? What we've seen is that there's a culture of protecting each other in the police force, and so a couple of the key provisions that preclude the types of robust civilian review that we want to see are the provisions that require that only other sworn law enforcement personnel can conduct investigations and conduct hearings that impose discipline.
We also feel, and the issue that would probably be the one that's most controversial, is to allow subpoena powers of not only certain documents, but also certain employees, not just Baltimore City police employees, but any employee that could help in the testimony of a case to find out whether or not a citizen was or was not harmed.
Also speaking out against a provision in the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights that affords officers 10 days after an incident before they are compelled to speak to investigators was Stephen Tabling, a retired lieutenant in the Baltimore Police and former chief of police in Salisbury, Maryland.
Back in the 70s, Commissioner Pomerleau gave me the responsibility of investigating all police-related shootings. I was here today because I'm against the 10-day rule that officers have. I think they need help, but I don't think 10 days is the proper time. An officer can waive that right, but their FOP seems to be telling them all the time, you stick to that, don't you bypass that right. But it's really bad because you can't get any information, and when you go that long period of time, minds don't work the same.
Is there a metropolitan region that's been seen as sort of universally as a model for an effective
Civilian Review Board?
Yes, excuse me.
I think it depends on who you ask. I think the D.C. Civilian Review Board, for example, has much more authority. It has 20, one of the things that Doc didn't mention is the funding issue, right? Is that we have a staff of 1 on the Baltimore Civilian Review Board, I think maybe 2. They have a staff of 20 and a $2 million budget. And I think that alone actually is really significant because they have the capacity to actually investigate, for example. But I think we heard, folks who were at the town hall on Wednesday heard the sort of extraordinary model they have in Toronto, where there's actual also governing power in their police accountability board, and I think that's we should be really looking at that as whether something like that is possible. But DC is more similar to the model we already have, but with I think significant improvements.
Representatives of law enforcement said they had no comment about whether they support changes to the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights.
As we all know, the Bill of Rights is being reviewed. At this point, we cannot discuss the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights.
Thank you. Thank you. And then finally,
What was good, though, about this hearing is that you don't hear any substantive arguments on the opposition side in terms of why not to make these certain amendments to the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights and why not to give civilian review boards more disciplinary power and governing power in terms of addressing issues of police misconduct. And so it's good that it's happening in a public forum, and I think it's good for this to be on the record because this will help folks in Annapolis who are talking to legislators to talk about, the things that the opposition will say and pretty much make clear that there are really no substantive arguments against both the Civilian Review Board giving that more power and amending the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights that will produce greater accountability for law enforcement.
what I'm hoping this is, and my plan is to take the names and the people that are here, ask them to contact 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 more, and build a group, a movement to come to Annapolis to champion legislative change and to testify, and not just testify, because it takes more than testimony. It takes actual advocacy. It takes actually reaching out to your specific legislators on the committee, the leadership such as Chairman Valerio, the Speaker Bush, Mike Miller, probably the toughest nut to crack of all, and saying we demand change, that that policing must change, that no death should result as a result of so-called law enforcement, and that whatever changes we need to do to secure the safety and protection of the people, we need to do it, while still not taking anything away from the safety and protection of law enforcement.
Remains to be seen if Annapolis will listen to the demands of the people
and expand civilian oversight of police. From Baltimore, this is Jessel Noor.